Right before we started recording, we were talking about Lego and how sometimes you just have a box of random pieces and you build what you can. And that can be, for me, anyways, the most fun I can have with Lego is inventing with what I have. And this is talked a lot about in the creative arts about available light, using the light that's available to you, using the resources that are available to you in creating a piece of art. And I think in games today, and we talked a little bit about this last time, but in games today, there's so much opportunity. There's so much available. There's so much storage on someone's computer. There's so much uh, information you can pack into a game that it feels limitless. Where I'm starting from, where I'm so limited by my own skills and experience, there's something exciting about not being able to go on down any avenue, but being forced to deal with the little resources that I have. For example, maybe starting to write a text-based game. Even if no one plays it, the opportunity to have my confinements liberate me is quite exciting. But I wonder if that's just me, or do you feel that that's true in your world as well? In whether it's in programming or in your personal life or in any other jobs that you do in your hobbies? Yeah.
Yeah, I think analysis paralysis is definitely a thing, right? That happens. It definitely happens to me. I think it's probably pretty common for most people when you're given too many options to just get stuck in trying to evaluate your different options rather than, being told this is what you have to do and you just have to figure out how to make that work. It's definitely true in development as well. Like at work, often it's really tough if you're not given clear requirements. And requirements really are going to be those limiting factors, what you have to work within. Um, because, as a dev, you can come up and you can create a bunch of different options that all might work for different scenarios. And I kind of alluded to this last time as well that often there isn't a clear solution. There are pros and cons to any solution. And usually things that are better for one are worse in another situation, and a lot of development is making those decisions. What are the pros and cons that I'm going to accept? So that can be lead to a lot of paralysis if you're given just if you're just told pick the best option rather than sometimes actually being limited and told nope, you know what, you're going to be limited by, it has to perform this well this quickly, or it can't take any more storage than this amount or whatever it is, or even more directly just yeah, no, you can only make a text-based game, that's all we're paying you to do, and
Right.
nobody's going to pay you to make one with fancy art, so don't waste your time. It can be nice. It can be nice not to have to evaluate a bunch of options and then
Right.
maybe get stuck in that evaluation portion where then you're not given a path. I think it's nice, even if they seem like limitations, really what it ends up being is a clear path to go down instead. Um, and you can always break out of that later, right?
Yeah, that's something I'm dealing with obviously with this project is determining the path and following the path. At the beginning of this, my path has been quite opaque. I don't really know exactly what I'm doing. I have three goals essentially. One goal is to talk about my learning and share it with others and hopefully have that propel me further. Another goal is to obviously develop a game of my own, even if it's just a simple text based thing or something I work with other people to gain the experience of actually making something, the same way a sculptor or a writer or a painter would do. Just you actually have to make something if you're going to envision yourself making things in the future. And the third thing would be like maybe 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, starting some kind of a studio or being a part of a studio that makes games, being a part of a group of people that does this regularly, not just for a one-off, but makes a living out of doing this. Those are my goals. The path to getting there is completely unknown to me. And I've spent since we last talked, I've spent the last week, uh, well, hammering some ideas out and struggling in some ways, not to learn, but to define what's important and what's not. I don't have all the time in the world. This is certainly not my full-time pursuit. I'm kind of finding the time in the cracks and crevices of my life, which is confined by family and by my other work, which makes money. So finding a path that is confined by those limitations has been difficult, but not because I can't find it, but almost because I don't know what's important and what's not, right? So one example of this is an idea I've had for a long time for this is to stream, to live stream me playing games with other people, but also possibly to live stream me studying. Someone recommended to me that I should live stream like learning to code, actually put that on a stream and see where that goes. That to me is so awkward to do, but I'm trying again to define what's important, what will help me, and what's superfluous. And the streaming thing is actually a big question for me because I don't know how important it is for me as a learning process, and I don't know if it's just a distraction. But I do know that the things I'm doing while streaming are hugely important. So I guess a question back to you, Lammy, is like you stream, you're a gamer that streams online. Um, do you get as much out of it as other people get from watching it? Yeah,
So I haven't streamed in, I don't know, maybe a year. Probably not quite that much. I don't know. It's exhausting for sure. I think people don't get that it can be exhausting. You are performing to a certain degree. You're on camera. I think, you can relate to this. Um, but there is a level of, you can sort of treat it as if you're not, and try your best to just be normal and act like you normally would.
yeah,
But it's really hard not to get more exhausted by it, especially if you're doing what Twitch kind of does best, which is engaging with the audience and actually having that back and forth. Otherwise, you're really just, recording yourself and other people are watching. And I would say you're probably not getting anything out of it, especially except that other people are getting something out of it. You're right. If you're not engaging in any way, then it's just something that other people can watch, but there isn't any interactivity. What I get out of it, even though it is exhausting, even though I think a lot of people agree that it can be a very difficult job, right, especially if it's bringing in money, is that you do get that social aspect of back and forth, and you do learn a lot because you're exposed to people you otherwise wouldn't be. And I think in your case, the reason that it might be really, really helpful is because it's a real lens into gaming and what gamers think about, what they
yeah,
find interesting, the psychology of how they would play a game. Backseat gaming. When you're on Twitch and you're streaming, you're gonna get people spoiling the game for you, telling you what to do, like giving you the answer to a puzzle you're trying to solve. And even that, like just looking at the psychology of what are people's approaches to a problem? Do they like just seeing the person figure it out for themselves? Or are they actually there just to show how smart they are and trying to shout out the answer before anybody else can? Moderation is very important on Twitch, by the way. I highly recommend that. Depends what you want to get out of it. Um, a lot of streamers have given up on not getting spoiled on games because that's not why they're doing it, right? They're doing it to be entertaining. They actually don't care about their own experiences doing it. If it's a job for them and they're getting paid, they think of it as I am an entertainer. I'm like a radio host. I'm a podcaster. That's the mentality that a lot of people have. Um, but if you are doing it to have fun as well, I thought of it as like I'm going to spend time gaming anyway. Why not? But it is more exhausting. You say that, you say why not, and you say, oh, I'll just throw it on and I won't care. But it's hard. It's hard not to care that a bunch of people are watching you or asking you questions or trying to interact. And I think that there's something really, really valuable there. And it is a balance of how much time do you have. I think for you, it's just doing a little bit of it and engaging a little bit with those people will tell you so much about the world of gaming right now, especially because so much of gaming is actually not gaming, but rather watching other people.
well, then here's my question for you. If that's true, do I need to be streaming myself or should I just be watching other people stream? Like if because I completely agree. I think that one of the most fantastic elements of Twitch is this gold mine of understanding what games are for, what they're about, how people engage, why they engage with them, what's boring, what's interesting. But surely I could find that out by watching. Do I need to stream to discover that?
Need is a heady term. I think it's helpful. I think both are helpful. You're getting a different perspective. I think if you only watch someone stream, you don't understand their point of view. Have you ever played Codenames?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So for people who haven't, it's a kind of word association game in teams where you know there's half the people are trying to create word associations and the other half are trying to guess what the other person's word associations are, let's say. But I only bring it up because you'll understand that until you've tried both roles, you do not understand the difficulty, especially if you've never been the spy master. And then you're the spy master, you go, oh, I see now why this is difficult. There's a weird, even if you're told the rules of the game, you don't really understand how difficult it is from the other person's view. Their view is so different of the game. And the kind of thinking they have to do is different. And so for Twitch, I think there's value in watching and being part of the chat, being part of the crowd. But there's value on being the streamer and realizing how difficult it is to continue doing what you're doing and also watching chat, trying to respond, remembering what you said because people will reference something you just said. And I know a lot of streamers, like I'll respond to something they said and they won't know what they said, right? So they don't realize that you're responding like they're because people are just talking. And um, so I think that there's value. I don't, at some point I think like any new experience, you have that click moment of getting getting it to a certain level, right? And whenever you learn something new, when you first start, it's like a totally brand new thing, and pretty soon you immediately have a totally different view of it. And then of course it could take years to advance past that sort of intermediate understanding stage and be like, wow, I thought I knew things. But even just getting to see a bit of that and trying it out, I think will add something, whether you feel like that's enough to your experience. But like it or not, streaming is it's a huge part of gaming and understanding that world. And I think that you do get a different understanding doing it.
And to be blunt, games are made to be streamed. Games are made to have other people watch people play. Like developers know this now. And so it's part of the process of developing a game is asking, how is this going to create engagement in a community? How is this going to create a conversation? And that's a fundamentally different means of creating a game than it used to be. Since we last spoke, I have streamed a few times. Once with another person, we were co-op playing, well, Artemis Siri. We were co-op playing Divinity Original Sin 2. And then I've tried a couple of times to stream on my own. And you're totally right. The conflict between performing and talking about things and bringing things out and just trying to be relaxed and normal as you normally would when playing a game is really difficult because, quite frankly, I'm going to sit in silence and say nothing at all if I'm just being normal. And I'm a very single-minded and contained gamer when I play a game. Like I'm in my head. Talking can sometimes defeat the purpose. But when I'm playing with someone else, it also brings out elements of the game that I never expected. But man, it was hard. Like as you say, hard work in an unexpected way. You're not just playing a game. You're cognizant of what people might be thinking, and of course, you're thinking, don't think about what they're thinking, just be natural. But then if I'm natural, why the hell am I saying anything right now? And it's just this weird conflict. When I was playing with Artemis Siri, it was really funny because at one point I died, and then it was about 5 minutes that he had to go resurrect me. And that was my favorite part because I because
You didn't
because I
have to
just
play.
watched. No, I didn't have to play. I suddenly went, okay, I'm going to watch you. Oh, this is so interesting what you're doing, and now I can talk freely and make fun of you or whatever I'm doing.
Which
And
is the
obvious,
experience of chat. That's what chat would be doing to you.
true, very true. So I found it fascinating, and there were times while streaming I felt like I am so dumb. Like I don't my understanding of the game is so limited to me clicking on a mouse pad, uh, as opposed, yeah. And my whole intention of trying to break down a game and understand it, and that's why I'm playing it, was not happening. I was losing myself in the world. Anyways, it was a fascinating experience, and I'm going to do it more, but I'm thinking a lot about it, obviously. Yeah.
There are two different kinds of streamers, though, maybe even three different kinds of streamers in terms of how they perform. Right? There's kind of the ones that are really good, really, really good at gaming. And
Hmm.
people watch them because they like watching people that are good at things. And those people often barely speak. It is not entertaining in a normal sense of the word. It's like watching an expert, right, at work. It's maybe more that esports feeling where you're just watching people that are way better than you'll ever be. And as a viewer, what you're getting out of it is really just trying to learn to emulate them if it's a game you care about. So in games that are competitive in some way, it's very common to find streamers like that where they essentially don't speak at all. It's all they're just playing the game really, really well, and that's enough because there's a community of people who want to see that. But on the flip side, there's the people who it really doesn't matter at all what game they are playing. Nobody is there for the game. Everybody is there just to hear them. And they're just bantering and having a good time. And especially if there's multiple people, they're just, talking to each other. If it's just the one streamer, they're probably just talking to chat. And the game is a background. It's that mindless activity that puts you in like flow state. Um, and you just talk. And there isn't, any it doesn't matter at all pretty much what the person is playing. And then there's the in between where somebody really does enjoy a game and is able to talk about it while they're playing, and maybe they're not the best or maybe they are, right, but they're able to. Are they talking about the game? Are they not talking at all? Or are they talking about completely unrelated things because it doesn't matter that they're playing the game? And there's value in all of those things, and you don't have to be like, you can choose the one that makes the most sense for what you're trying to do.
There's a fourth kind of streamer I've realized. Up until a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, the total number of times I'd been on Twitch was maybe a dozen. Out of curiosity, just what this is, why are people playing games that other people watch? And then as I got interested in some games, I would watch those games being played. But obviously, I've dived in over the last week or two and fascinated by this world, and also fascinated to see that there are streamers who wear a bikini and sit at a hot tub and literally don't say anything either. Like
Mm-hmm.
they're just there. I I guess I have to admit that I watched one for 5 minutes. Um, but because I was just like, I couldn't believe it. And so she was literally in her bikini at a hot tub, hold like on her phone, saying nothing
Yeah.
for the whole time. And I don't know if she did anything else for the 3 hours that she was streaming. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and there were like 10,000 people watching or something like that. And obviously, I'm not an idiot. I know that there's an interest and why that there's an interest in that. I'm not asking the why question, but I am asking how much of an intersection is there between that and gaming? And then for you as a woman, how do you feel about this space? I'm just deadly curious about this. Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm. So intersection. Let's talk about that. I would not be surprised if, and I don't know. I'd have to see if there were studies done about this, but I would not be surprised if the people who watch gaming streams are also the people who watch hot tub streams, as they're called. Um, I think there's less of an intersection with other kinds of streams. So speaking of you potentially streaming learning to code, that is a kind of stream that exists. There are work with me streams where it's just somebody who's doing their own things, and it's a community of people that are essentially saying it's like, let's all go to the coffee shop and study together, right? Or except you're just doing it virtually. But that's the same idea, and it helps some people, or at least some people think that they're being productive if they open that stream. I don't know if they are. But there's that kind of a stream, or stream where people are doing art or playing music. And I would bet those kind of IRL, like in real life streams, I don't know that those would overlap as much with the hot tub streams as the gaming ones. If anything, maybe, and this is maybe just my bias showing that I assume the general gaming audience might also be the one more likely to watch hot tub streams.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
I'm now curious to know what the stats are. But I think there's a level of curiosity. Twitch is a really, really interesting psychological phenomenon, almost like a social experiment. Um, and I don't think we know yet exactly where it's going to end up. We know that it's fun to watch people play games. We also know that it's fun to just spend time with people, to watch people cooking, to watch people make art or play music. And in the gaming side of things, I think it's a lot more toxic than probably any of the other ones. Um, you know, we've talked about it before, you and I, about the fact that as a woman on Twitch, it's it's really hard not to just expect toxicity. As a woman gaming, you just expect it. You know, if I'm playing pretty much any game almost, unless it's like, let's say, a game that maybe you can assume has more of a female base, like or like a Nintendo game or something with more younger people and maybe more women. But in something like League of Legends, and I mean in League of Legends, anyone can expect toxicity, and everyone should. But it's especially worse when you're a woman. You just They could be and act totally normal, you know, somebody that you're playing with randomly who you don't know, and you get into a voice call and they hear a voice that sounds feminine, and it's like 50-50 whether they just break down into some sort of complete toxicity, right? Whether it's, you know, actually being rude, or whether it's just not knowing how to react and being too flabbergasted by meeting a female gamer as if we don't exist. And so being on Twitch, it's something that I have to think about all the time. The fact that I am more likely to be targeted, um, because people think they can, because women are the minority in that space, and gaming in general has been gate kept from women, and as a result, you know, not only you get both the people who like want to get in your pants and the people who don't think that you're worth anything because you're a woman and therefore you must be horrible at gaming. Um,
I'm sure those
so
two intersect as well.
yeah, it's a very bizarre place to be. Um, at the same time, like, more power to the female gamers who also realize that if they're trying to make money, there's a way to do it, is to put that camera on and know that some of the attention they're going to be getting is just because they're attractive to a large number of the people that are watching them. You know, we can look at something else, for example, voices, right? There are people who have really, really beautiful voices. Um, and that's visible on Twitch as well. And people are drawn in by that. It's still a superficial thing to care about. Yesterday, I actually clicked on a Twitch link that somebody put in after a league game, and I opened it up and I was like, oh wow, they actually like sound. I hadn't even looked at the screen yet. I'm like, they sound nice. Like, they sound like a nice human being.
Yeah.
And we make all these judgments all the time, right? Whether it's visually or through whatever other way we can. And it is harder to be a woman in that space. I think it's more dangerous. You get a lot more hate, um, and unsolicited love. um, but I think the main difference is that there are fewer women, so they stick out more. Men can be drowned out in a sea of other gamers. And if you're a woman, you're way more likely for somebody to stick around just because you're different. So anybody that's doing something different, including when hot tub streams were different, it was something that attracted people because it was new.
Is this changing? I mean, in your experience as a gamer, in your experience as a streamer, in your experience in the gaming world, where women have been kept out for so long and still form a minority of voices in that world, I is it changing? Like, I remember it was, I think 8 years ago when there was that big scandal, Gamersgate or Gamergate scandal. I mean, 8 years ago, have things changed in that time? Are they becoming more sophisticated? Are audiences becoming more mature? Or is this becoming more pronounced as we see so many conflicts becoming in our world today at large?
Oh, I think it's still a very big issue in the actual game development world. So Riot, the company that makes League of Legends and a bunch of other games now, they've had a huge lawsuit on their hands for the last few years around how women have been treated in their company. Um, and it, like, companies, dev companies in general, are notorious for not treating women well. And I don't think that that's gotten much better. On the gaming and gamer side of things, I feel like maybe it's a little better. Um, I think that it's a both side thing where men have been more okay to show that they're playing and happy to play games that were maybe associated with younger audiences or more feminine audiences. So I think, for example, that the Nintendo Switch having as big of a sales life cycle as it's had since it's come out, Nintendo just being really the winner of the console wars, of the past generation. And I think many people do agree with that, even if lots of people, again, like to hate on Nintendo. And why do they like to hate on Nintendo? Because they can pretend that they're better than somebody who plays a Nintendo game, little baby games, um,
Right.
and games made for girls. But what I've seen is that Nintendo did such a good job with the Switch that even harder core gamers have kind of admitted to enjoying playing those games. And it's created a more positive environment for people that do enjoy those kinds of games, and therefore there's been a little bit more acceptance. So I think it's gotten better in that regard. I also think that online you kind of do have to rule a little bit with an iron fist, and you have to create the audience that you want to be around, and communities that do well, right, self police. So it's kind of the opposite of how I actually think people should interact in general, which is that it's good to hear dissenting opinions and to surround yourself not just with an echo chamber, but to be safe online. When you're in this very public and on display place, I think you do kind of have to have a very strong message around the kinds of people that are welcome there in terms of not being bigoted, right? And you're essentially saying we're not going to welcome any toxicity, we're not going to welcome bigotry into this community, and I've seen that work really well. That Twitch streams that have really good moderation around that and who project what their values are more likely to have a positive community and less likely to have kind of issues arise. And that's, I think it's gotten better, right? Communities, and I don't know how much time you've spent in any kind of online communities in general, but you can kind of see they coalesce and they end up kind of self-sustaining once everyone there agrees on a set of values, a set of core values that they're all about, and like why are they there. So I think Twitch has gotten better at that because it's gotten more mature as a platform.
As you mentioned, these enormous online, partly anonymous spaces are free for millions of people to join in the flash of an instant. Whereas in our personal physical lives, we moderate whether we know it or not, whether we want to accept dissenting opinions or we want to, put ourselves into our safe little chamber. Either way, we're moderating by virtue of the fact that our physical existence is controlled by ourselves. We don't, it's impossible to simply suddenly speak to a million people unless, of course, you're a president of some country. For most people, our experiences day to day are much more limited, and so it's easier to make a single choice to allow one person to tell me what he thinks when I don't agree with it. But when 8,000 people are doing it all at once, it's a totally different thing that we're not prepared for, that we didn't ask for, didn't sign up for, and are not built for as human beings. So it makes a perfect amount of sense. And of course, this goes not necessarily in contrast, but it's an interesting thing to align with ideas around free speech, freedom of association, these ideas of allowing people to speak their mind, which in a democratic society is crucial for securing our future. But at the same time, when our society is so interconnected, we there has to be some level of moderation here, or we're going to tear each other apart. And we're so early into this social experiment. It's only been a handful of years, really, since this type of online engagement, mass online engagement, has been around. And it's been an even shorter amount of time that it's been popular, that it's been essentially mass central culture, mainstream culture. And I find it fascinating, if only to say, in 100 years from now, we'll be able to look back, if we're still around, and say, how did that experiment go? Where did it lead? Did it go to a dead end, or did it take us somewhere good? But I can't help but go on to Twitch and experience, or frankly, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever, and experience immediate toxicity, even if it's just one level below the surface, even if it's a passive aggressive form of toxicity. That's a bit of a tangent away from game development, obviously, but I think it's an important one because that's the world in which we are hopefully making games, and the world we're responding to when we make games. Yeah, so I think it's a fascinating point. Um, and I'm very curious as to see where it goes. Where do you think it's going to go? Like I know I'm asking you to hold a crystal ball for a second, but where do you think this world is leading in the next 5, 10, 20 years?
I mean, gaming is growing from what I know year after year. The number of people who game is just ballooning, right? So as it becomes more and more normal, I do think that the idea of what a gamer is has changed a lot in the last few decades. And so, tiny bit of a history lesson is that it was thought of as something only for children, right? At the beginning, games were marketed to kids, and specifically, they started eventually being marketed to boys. Um, but more and more, we see that one of the largest groups that games, right? If you look at all of gaming, it's like mobile games played by women, something like 25 to 35 or something. There's some statistic about one of the largest subset of gamers. And mobile gaming itself is growing a lot. And I think when the lines start to blur between consoles, PC, mobile, like really what those gaming spaces look like, and it becomes more and more the norm, just as with development on the whole. And we talked about last time that we had this idea that developers were a certain type of person. And as we see it become more and more important to just be aware of software development and learn a little bit of coding as anybody, right, in any industry, I think gaming too, just like reading, it will just become a thing that people do. And some people do it a bit more than others. But I think it will get more normalized. I don't know if in the next 5 to 10 years, but I do see it being legitimized by the larger whole as a really legitimate form of art and expression, and a hobby that hopefully isn't seen 10 years from now as being a waste of time. As a person who used to be a massive reader, in many ways, you're doing more when you're gaming than when you're just reading, right? Like you're engaging more, you're using more parts of your brain uh, when you're playing a game. And yet we think of reading as this kind of, oh, intellectual people read, and it's a consumerist activity at the end of the day. You're not producing anything. You're not really using your brain in more ways than one. And it's still a wonderful thing, and I love it. But uh, that idea that gaming is somehow more like rots your brain more
Yeah.
than reading is bizarre. So yeah, I would hope that we would get to a place where it's become more normalized.
Yeah, I think two things have occurred. I mean, we've changed our perception, but games themselves have also changed in that time. Uh, I completely agree. Like I'm a big reader. I love reading. I get something out of reading that I don't get from games, that I don't get from watching anything on the computer, whether it's streaming or television, movies, whatever. Um, but I miss it sometimes. But at the same time, there are many, many, many games, especially ones that I like to play, where reading is involved, and the reading is good. It's good writing. It's well written. I mean, this has become much more of an art form. It's elevated itself to be essentially equivalent to reading. Unfortunately, it's a whole generation of people who grew up with this idea of the holiness of reading, including myself. Like it's hard for me to kind of shake this off as well. I'm not only a reader, I'm a writer, and so I of course there's a part of me that wants to elevate it, but I can't deny the fact that games tell stories that are just as interesting, just as profound, just as life changing potentially as any book, and should be. They're vehicles, they're vessels for stories, and also for experiences, which could be far more holistic than pieces of paper with writing on them. Um, yeah, anyways, we're coming to the end of our time, Lammy, but I wanted to ask you a question, which I might ask every time we chat at the end, which is what do you want to talk about next time? Like, what are you burning with desire to discuss in all of these fields? And whether we hit it next time or not, it'll give us kind of a bullet point list of things we got to hit.
Well, there was something I was going to ask you this time, so maybe we'll talk about it then. But, we talked about streaming, and we talked about how developers make games for streamers, and we talked about games with strong stories. But I think often games with strong stories might be at odds with games with strong kind of experiences, and that um, kind of gaming that surprises. So I wanted to ask you, do you think, speaking of being limited in something, Do you think it might be interesting to try to come up with a game that really is with streamers in mind? And there are a lot of games out there. There might be some that I send your way to kind of look into, but there are ones where it's more of a social experiment, where the game itself includes chat. It's integrated into Twitch in some way, and there's a lot of those games which are really just something kind of idle game to do in the background while mostly the streamer is presenting. But there are untapped, I think, still parts of game development in creating a gaming experience that's meant for streamers. And whether you had any interest in that, or you would go, no, I'm not going to consider streaming when I make my game. It's just going to be because besides considering things like the music you have in your game, which might not be streamer friendly, or the visuals you have, which might not be streamer friendly, there's lots of games now that put in actual interactions into Twitch. So it could be a normal game, but some of the characters will be names of people that are in your chat or things like that, silly things that you could do. And I mean, there's probably a lot of creative things you could do in that space. So maybe we'll talk about how you think you will engage with that maybe after another
Yeah.
week of Twitch, whether you think you want to at all take that into account or whether you're just doing it for research purposes, all that Twitch streaming and watching.
Well, I'll just give you a partial answer because I think that's a whole lot of stuff we can dig into in the future. There's a lot there, but my answer would have to be, of course I can't close the door on that. If I did, then I'm an idiot because I'm just starting. I should not be closing any doors. I don't know what I'm doing. How could I possibly say, nope, that's not for me? And that's my personality sometimes. I like closing doors because it makes the path a lot clearer. So I'm not going to close the door. Thank you for pointing that door out to me to not close. um, Good one. That's really good. I think that's a great place to leave us. I think we should address that next time, as scary as it might be for me. Thank you for another great chat.
Thank you.